we're kind of bringing Tether right now to Bitcoin. Like that's a big narrative that Tether is now going to come on Lightning Network. And I'm just kind of like, all right, hooray, cool. Like, but that's not what I'm in this revolution for. As much as we want to perpetuate this Bitcoin revolution, that people really tremendously value stablecoins, like to the point where it doesn't matter how much we kind of preach about like Bitcoin is freedom technology and it's store of value. Like these people, they don't have any value to store. And so this is the way of the Bitcoins community saying, okay, if we can't get them on board with Bitcoin, the asset yet, let's at least give them stablecoins, but have those stablecoins live on Bitcoin rails. And indirectly, that could benefit Bitcoin. If there were changes that could come in, maybe people talk about things like covenants, it would be very, very beneficial. And it would make some of this stuff a bit cleaner, arguably more secure, more efficient, but fundamentally, it's not required. And I think that's what's kind of contributed to this Overton window shifting and this new excitement where people say, if we do never get any sort of change whatsoever in Bitcoin, some of this stuff is actually possible.
For the people that maybe don't know you, maybe give us a short overview of like, what are you doing and who are you?
Sure. So yeah, my name is David Seroy. I work at a company called Alpin Labs. We're building something called ZK Rollups on top of Bitcoin. And this is an alternative layer 2 scaling solution to kind of bring expressivity and scaling to Bitcoin. I come from a little bit of a like armchair libertarian type background. So when I got into Bitcoin, I was very much predisposed to a lot of the ideological side of, separation of money and state and kind of more like Austrian monetary maximalist type ideas. But then over the years, I kind of was peering over the fence into some of these other ecosystems and saying, can we bring some of this technology and some of this innovation to Bitcoin? And for a while, it was a resounding no. But now there seems to be a little bit of change in the air. There seems to be opportunity for us to bring things to Bitcoin that we never imagined were possible. And that's kind of what I've dedicated next part of my life to.
What are, for the people that don't know, that it was also something new for me, what are ZK roles?
Yeah. So I guess I can start very early on in Bitcoin, like people understood that, hey, there's going to be some scaling limitations here. Like you maybe can only do a certain number of transactions per second, or, you can't add certain functionality to Bitcoin. And people kind of explore these ideas. One of the earliest things was a concept called sidechains. And sidechains are like separate blockchains from Bitcoin. But then you can take your BTC, the asset, and you can bridge it into these sidechains that maybe have different functionality. They have, maybe they can add privacy. Maybe they can do faster transactions. Maybe they just have any sort of functionality you have. And for a while in Bitcoin, people thought that this was kind of like the hero solution to everything. But there was a fundamental problem, which is that you were trusting somebody to get into these other sidechain ecosystems. You're giving up custody of your Bitcoin in order to receive a derivative token in this other sidechain ecosystem. And so that idea kind of lost a lot of interest because it was antithetical to what we care about in Bitcoin, which is, sovereignty and freedom and not reliant on centralized parties. But long story short, in some other ecosystems like Ethereum, which I know is like a taboo topic to discuss, they really did have these kind of like, breakthrough ideas that said, hey, we can take this concept of a sidechain and then we can remove the centralized party using some fancy cryptography, and we can have that vision that we wanted, which is don't change Bitcoin, don't frick with Bitcoin, but allow other people to opt into these other functionality in these other features. And so a lot of those ideas of this concept ZK rollups took that original idea of sidechains, improved it with some fancy cryptography, and now people are saying, hey, we can bring this back to Bitcoin. That's a little bit of a summary of the history.
It's also interesting. I mean, there are two really interesting things in there. The first is like, I in the beginning, like 1 year ago, I was really toxic maxi of hating on all of the altcoins. Now I'm more practical in a sense of like, I don't dabble with them, but they have some value in them because people are kind of experimenting with them. And because they're experimenting with it, they might bring something valuable to Bitcoin as like a test net. And as I understood it, you got that idea of those ZK rollups kind of from Ethereum and like smart contracts and many other smaller things maybe come from the altcoin world into Bitcoin. And I think that's not a bad thing overall. I don't see a value in having something kind of decentralized. Like, like for me, that's Altcoin. It's like, it's not a centralized database, but it's also not really decentralized. Like, I don't get the point of altcoins using them, but I do see a value in learning from them what we could maybe put onto Bitcoin. There's some value into that, I feel like.
Yeah, and to be clear, like this isn't about altcoins. Like I definitely am sympathetic and kind of come from that camp where Bitcoin is the revolution. Like I think there's pretty clear evidence that a lot of these other tokens are pretty worthless and like they're just rife with grift and just like solutions looking for problems. And at the end of the day, like the only clear revolution in product market fit is, you know, Bitcoin as money. So it's not about trying to bring, you know, altcoins over to Bitcoin. It's about trying to expand the functionality of Bitcoin itself and trying to expand this revolution of separation of money and state. And while as a byproduct of some of this stuff that's coming, like people, unfortunately, like for better or worse, will be able to deploy tokens. Along with that, we get amazing features and functionality for Bitcoin. We get things like, you know, you could take this cell phone here, which has a hardware wallet in it. It basically has like a ledger or a Trezor in it, but it can't be accessed right now. And when you add this kind of like trustless expressivity to Bitcoin, now everyone in the world that has a cell phone, they can start essentially keeping like a hardware wallet on here. They can start making payments using, you know, Face ID, trustless with no centralized intermediaries. Like we can have things like Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. You can have, you know, the ability to borrow against your Bitcoin at extremely low interest rates. You can have things like the, you know, being able to buy Bitcoin without Coinbase or without Binance. Like there's really some beautiful functionality that in this sea of kind of chaos that was these other ecosystems, there's small little bits of innovation. And for me, I think the Overton window is shifting and people are saying, okay, like maybe some of this stuff is actually kind of cool and it can further our revolution, which is Bitcoin. Not anybody else's revolution, but make the Bitcoin revolution better rather than other people trying to come in and co-opt Bitcoin.
What do you mean with like the Overton window is shifting?
I think, you know, the past few years, there really was that kind of like toxic maxi movement, which it's like everything was a scam. Everything is a shitcoin. Like Bitcoin is the core revolution. Like we need nothing else. And while there is like some core truth to that, I think people like are kind of shifting from that perspective. Even the most maximalist of people, and they're kind of like the Overton window is shifting in the sense that people are being like, like maybe we leaned just a little bit too hard in that extreme, and like maybe we do want, you know, things like non-custodial you know, solutions, and maybe we do want to add like some form of expressivity to Bitcoin. And I think a lot of people in Bitcoin, including some of my close friends who are pretty hardcore, are at least now entertaining some of this stuff more so than they would before. And I even think that you're seeing this in like the deepest levels of kind of like respected Bitcoin developers, like Bitcoin core engineers who are kind of like actively researching like this concept that I mentioned, like of ZK, of zero knowledge, of this like advanced kind of bleeding edge cryptography, and saying, hey, like this stuff could actually fit into Bitcoin. So that's what I mean by the Overton window is shifting, where you would kind of mention like in the context of altcoins that, you know, we're going to take the good ideas from altcoins and bring them to Bitcoin. That was like in the early days of Bitcoin, that was a very, very common thing that we would say and something that we believed. And I think we lost sight of that for a little while, that, hey, Bitcoin is the gravity well, like Bitcoin is the magnet. All this stuff is going to come back to Bitcoin. And we kind of shunned it for years and said, no, like we don't want anything to come back to Bitcoin. Like we just want to reject it all. And now that Overton window is shifting and people are saying, okay, a lot of it we don't want on Bitcoin, but like some of it we actually do. And like, let's bring that gravitational well back to Bitcoin.
Is there anything that is required changes on the base layer, or is it just like how we build on top of a already kind of finished base layer product?
There's no changes that are required to Bitcoin layer one whatsoever. To be clear, like if there were changes that could come in, maybe people talk about things like covenants, it would be very, very beneficial. And it would make some of this stuff a bit cleaner, arguably more secure, more efficient. But fundamentally, it's not required. And I think that's what's kind of contributed to this Overton window shifting and this new excitement where people say, huh, okay, like if we do never get any sort of change whatsoever in Bitcoin, some of this stuff is actually possible. That's at the root of this kind of change.
Interesting. I mean, if there's no change at the base layer required for an innovation happening on top of Bitcoin, I feel like nobody can be pissed off by that because then it's just using the Bitcoin as it already is. If there's now a debate happening, or like, should we, like 2017 is an extreme example, of course, now with the block size wars, but that's like an understanding. And maybe it also comes a little bit from that of like this, because it was such a hard attack within Bitcoin that the Bitcoin has got really productive. And it's hard for me to relate to that because I was just not in 2017 there. But I can imagine being active in 2017, and living through an industry, all of the, I almost tossed my light now down. But being an industry, all of a sudden there's someone that attacks the core of Bitcoin, the security, the decentralization. It then makes it feel like, oh, like maybe that's happening now with like whatever goes on. But if it doesn't touch the main layer, like Bitcoin will handle whatever is on top of it, and the free market will show if it has value or not. Like it's a free market play for me.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think Jameson Lopp, I'm paraphrasing here, but he kind of mentioned that in Bitcoin, whatever the current default position is the winning position or the one with the leverage. And by that, I mean that if the default is you can't build anything on Bitcoin, then that is the camp that is essentially in power. But now that you can essentially build some of this stuff on Bitcoin, because people kind of had these kind of creative ways to now start building, that's kind of reigniting this season too. Like now it's the builders that are in control. Like in the past few years, it was the ossifiers and kind of like the hardcore maximalists that were in control. And because if we ever had this conversation where I was making some sort of pitch and saying, hey, this is a really cool feature, we'd love to add this to Bitcoin, they could just say, okay, go ahead and fork it. Fork Bitcoin. Good luck trying to change it yourself. But now that we can actually build this stuff and the default position is, hey, no changes to Bitcoin whatsoever are required. Now the kind of like winning position, so to speak, are the people that are going to be building, and anybody that kind of wants to ossify or prevent this stuff from coming to Bitcoin, now the builders are saying, well, you guys fork it. You guys fork off and you remove some of this stuff like Taproot that enabled some of this new functionality. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting power dynamic that's starting to play out here in Bitcoin. That we don't need the soft fork to build any of this stuff.
Yeah, like you can build everything directly on top of Bitcoin. And people also like there's this, I think, what was it, 1.5 years ago, or 2 years ago, where this big debate on like spam on top of Bitcoin was, I think like that time frame. And I was always, I didn't have the podcast back then, but I was always very hard on like, if they spam the Bitcoin transactions, they're paying for the security of Bitcoin. That's overall a good thing. Like they're investing basically in Bitcoin. And I never thought that's sustainable. And we now see like we have like very low, like you can probably make like a transaction for like 50 cents now on the Bitcoin base layer. Back then we had some times where we had $500 you had to pay for transactions. So it was not sustainable at all. But it showed kind of like, yeah, like you can do it on Bitcoin. You can inscribe one Satoshi and pay €1,000 for that. go ahead. Like it is good for the overall Bitcoin security. Every attack, it's a small attack, big attack, whatever attack it might be, even if it's not even an attack, even if it's just building on top of Bitcoin, this all makes kind of Bitcoin stronger, and it kind of ties into the thing back, like everything is good for Bitcoin, even though I'm not a fan of that saying, but like most of the stuff is actually good for Bitcoin and not bad at all.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple interesting points there. Like even if we kind of said all this stuff that potentially could be done with Bitcoin, with ordinals and everything, and just so people are clear, like that's not what we're building. Us at Alpin, like we're kind of building more of financial applications, non-custodial solutions, like very like money oriented stuff. But even if you're kind of like anti ordinals and JPEGs on the chain, it's kind of been shown that you literally can't like add filters credibly and like fully prevent people from ever just posting arbitrary data on Bitcoin. So as much as people don't like it's kind of like an impossible problem to solve unless you completely gut and strip Bitcoin and basically like hard fork it. I also think you brought up another good point that yes, like in the long run, we do need to start adding more fees to the Bitcoin layer one. Like every 4 years, the miners make less money. There could be a scenario where eventually they're making so little money that they say mining isn't worth it, and it could destabilize the network. Like we do need to start adding, ways to drive transaction fees and volume to Bitcoin in order to keep it secure. And I think what is interesting is now that we can build, more expressive like layer twos on top of Bitcoin that settle to the Bitcoin layer one, what you'll start to see is people say, hey, maybe I want to use payments on something like a ZK rollup, or maybe I want to, borrow against my Bitcoin, or maybe I want to, again, use that passkeys on you can have all this functionality, and all of that can settle to the Bitcoin layer one, which could drive significant fees to the layer one and pay these miners. So I think it's a huge blessing, honestly, this now ability to start, building credible layer twos that can settle on Bitcoin and drive a lot of fees using like monetary applications.
Interesting. I want to touch later. Let's go now and a little bit on zero knowledge rollups, on Lightning, on layer two things, because I think when it comes to Bitcoin topics outside of the economics, and we touched on that before already, that sometimes the layer two stuff and like scaling Bitcoin, it's like a little bit of a niche topic of Bitcoin, because people are really like they are using it now as a store of value. Like that's the use case that 99% of Bitcoiners use it for, and there are some that experiment with other stuff on top of Bitcoin, but most people use it as a store of value. So what are they usually most interested in? Like the economics of it, the number go up technology, the freedom go up technology is like using it as a bank account where you might get unbanked, and all those topics. And so we have a lot of education to do, I think, when it comes to layer two of scaling Bitcoin. So help us think through of like, what is Lightning in the ecosystem? What are you seeing maybe with like Fediments? What are you seeing with like ZK Rollups, zero knowledge rollups, what you are doing? And how does this all kind of fit together?
Okay, sure. So I guess we can start with Lightning Network. Lightning Network is a very specific architecture that is kind of tailor-made to do like one specific task, which is payments. So you can do high volumes of just purely transferring the asset back and forth. And so you and I, Robin, we can open a channel where we can send very fast Bitcoin between each other, and then you can open another channel with somebody else, and then I can access that person through you, and you kind of create this topography. And in theory, Lightning's like very cool for payments. But I think over time, people have realized that it pretty much just does payments, and the user experience to interact with Lightning ends up being a bit clunky. It's not easy. It's not like you can open up your phone kind of like a Venmo or a Cash App style experience and just like instantly be able to send and receive payments in a non-custodial way. If you want that experience in Lightning, a lot of people are seeing that you kind of have to use some sort of custodian to do it. So Lightning's still a fantastic solution. but there are limitations around the user experience and the kind of potential custodial nature of it. The other thing that you had mentioned is something called Fediments. So Fediments uses a concept called federation, where you're essentially relying or trusting on some amount of people, whether it's 1, 3, 5, or whatever, and as long as the majority of them are honest, then you can operate in this Fediment. And in this Fediment, you get perfect privacy transactions, which is an amazing benefit, and it's very scalable payments as well. And so Fediments and Federation generally are very, very flexible. You can get the wonderful user experience, you can get the functionality of privacy. In theory, you could even add smart contracts, but the fundamental trade-off is like you're trusting someone there. And could the owners of the federation, which kind of govern the Fediment, like could they censor you? Yes. Could they steal all of your funds? Yes. And so I think it's a decent option for us to have, but it's perhaps a little bit antithetical to this, not your keys, not your coin, have sovereignty that we want in Bitcoin. ZK Rollups, on the other hand, are a way for us to have the single best user experience that you could possibly imagine. Something that feels like Cash App, that feels like Venmo. Except you're not reliant on a centralized intermediary, and it allows you to have these more expressive smart contracts if there's kind of useful applications in Ethereum, again, without relying on a centralized intermediary. And the way that a ZK rollup works, I'll try to explain it here, and you can let me know if it gets a little too technical, is with any sort of Bitcoin scaling solution whatsoever. Conceptually, they all work the same way. That Bitcoin, the asset, it technically can never leave the layer one. So what you do is you and I would maybe take our Bitcoin and we would lock it on the layer one in something like a multi-sig. And then that Bitcoin gets represented in the layer two. Whether that layer two is Lightning or Fediments or ZK rollup, you're always locking BTC on the layer one, and then you're essentially issuing a kind of derivative asset on this layer two. The question is, how does Bitcoin layer one know what happened on the layer two? If you're operating in Lightning Network and you're sending all these payments, how does Bitcoin know what the new updated balances for everyone are? If you send it into a Fediment, how does it know what happened up there? Same thing in a ZK rollup. Well, this concept of a zero knowledge proof is the ability to prove the validity of something without a person having to recreate or recompute that work. So in this sense, in a ZK rollup, if you and I, Robin, do a bunch of transactions and we do smart contracts and whatever, and the balances all change, this is all happening off-chain on the layer two, we can compress all of that into this cryptographic thing called a zero knowledge proof, almost like a digital thumbprint or a fingerprint. And the Bitcoin layer one can read that and say, look, I don't care if you did Fartcoin, NFT, DeFi, private payments, whatever. Like Bitcoin has no idea about all of that. All it knows is this final result that Robin now has, 2 Bitcoin, even though he started off with 1. And here's a mathematical proof that proves the validity, that proves with mathematical certainty that your balance is now 1 Bitcoin. And that allows Bitcoin to kind of like receive this information from the layer 2, but not force our nodes to actually go and recompute that all of itself. So Bitcoin doesn't, our Bitcoin nodes, which we want to keep lean and small and the network decentralized, they don't have to compute all of this stuff. They just have to verify the final result. And verifying this is much more scalable and much more easy than computing it. And all of that allows us to add this functionality and scale and everything on that layer 2s, but still anchor it to Bitcoin layer 1. How'd I do?
That's it. I understood it. It's just for me like very hard to find the difference between what Lightning and what ZK Rollers are, because both are basically, as you said, they're reporting up and then they do something with like Lightning with like opening channels and then like closing it, then it gets comes back onto the main layer, and the same thing is here is also like you're opening up, you're locking the keys basically in, you're doing something on top of it, and then at some point you want to lock it back in on the main layer, and then Bitcoin knows, okay, like Robin has now 1 Bitcoin more, like those Bitcoin got distributed in that way. So maybe let's talk like the differentiation between how Lightning works versus the zero knowledge proof.
Well, maybe I'll try to go non-technical first. Lightning, again, you really only can do payments, and the user experience is not great. With something like a roll-up, you can do anything. You can program the money to function any way you want with any sort of smart contract, with any sort of user experience. But it's maybe not as custom built for payments. So that's just the high level difference there. Lightning's payments, not great UX. ZK Rollups are any functionality you can imagine with like the best user experience possible. Because of that, like you can't add expressivity in smart contracts to Lightning. You can only do that with a rollup. So does that answer your question, or are you wanting to try to dive in more deeply into the tech?
Maybe one thing that I've never touched on the podcast itself. If you want to, like, I think it's great on that point because we mentioned it. What are actually smart contracts? What are they doing? And how does this maybe then it gets maybe more easy to understand the other stuff?
The way that I think of a smart contract is almost like an automated, escrow company. So in real world, we have escrow companies like attorneys. Like if you're going out and buying a house and, you're selling your house to me, I would send my money into this escrow contract. You would essentially send the deed of your house into this escrow, and then an attorney would have the instructions that say, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then transact the transaction. So you're trusting a kind of centralized intermediary to follow a set of instructions, and they are legally bound to follow those instructions. If the attorney violates, the instructions of the escrow, then they could be liable and they could be sued. You could think of a smart contract as a way to kind of create an automated escrow for money where people can put in, Bitcoin or some sort of money or other, tokens or assets, and they can program a contract to say, follow this rule, this rule, this rule, this rule, this rule. And instead of having like an attorney there that's kind of responsible for following all these rules, the smart contract will essentially facilitate all of those rules without any sort of centralized intermediary. So that allows you to program money without having something like an attorney. I think that's a decent analogy, is to think of smart contracts as just programmable escrow agreements.
Interesting. There's so much happening with Bitcoin, like also with like mini scripts and stuff like that, and time locks and all those topics, which make things possible that weren't possible previous or like a few years ago and stuff like that. Super interesting. So basically, we have with ZK Rollups a possibility to build the traditional financial space in a better way on top of Bitcoin with borrowing against it, like with other stuff. What are the use cases for those that you're most excited about? Like, what are you, like, if you think about in 5-10 years, and you think like, okay, that's the best case or like the best use case for that. And that's probably also the most mainstream use case of that.
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of these, but we'll drill down to them. One is just the user experience. Like, I think it's difficult and clunky for people to store their own private keys and use hardware wallets. And while we should always educate about that, and that is definitively the best way to store your Bitcoin, if we want to mass onboard the world, they're going to want something that feels a little friendlier to use Bitcoin, and things that, again, are compatible with their smartphones but are still secure. So the user experience is a huge one for me. Another one that I'm passionate about are, Bitcoin-backed borrowing and Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. There are ways to create, credible, not like Terra Luna style Ponzi schemes, but like real deal, like highly secure and truly decentralized, not decentralized in name only, but truly decentralized Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. And that to me is like a very powerful concept that we can go around to all of these, things like Bitcoin Jungle or Bitcoin Beach or these kind of circular economies and say, look, Bitcoin is the revolution, but we understand that stablecoins are really, really valuable. So instead of using this centralized fiat-backed stablecoin that quite literally perpetuates the global sovereign debt crisis and perpetuates this problem that we're trying to fight against, here's a superior Bitcoin-backed stablecoin that has censorship resistance. And getting people on board with that concept of using a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin is really cool. And that is, to me, a stepping stone to hyper-Bitcoinization. That people saying stablecoins are really valuable right now, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins are a better version of this, and eventually you'll see the revolution of just using Bitcoin natively. That's a natural progression for me. The last thing I'll say here, as I mentioned, Bitcoin-backed borrowing. I love companies like Unchained and Ledin and Hodl Hodl, but frankly, like these companies are not just centralized, but they're also extremely expensive. Like paying in the teens with on interest rate, and then annual renewal fees, and then admin fees. It's very, very, very expensive. And what we're seeing is on chain with smart contracts, you can build, frankly, way superior borrowing experiences that are much cheaper with much friendlier terms that are actually decentralized with provably no rehypothecation, no fractional reserve, no financial funny business. These are actually better than the TradFi solutions. And borrowing is something that I think every Bitcoiner at least just wants to have the option to have. So those are a few of the use cases that I'm really excited about.
Is that something that's already kind of built, or something that you can already kind of test out, or is it something that you're looking forward in a few years' time?
It depends what you mean. I mean, some of this stuff exists on Ethereum, but the problem is if you want to try to use Bitcoin to use that stuff on Ethereum, you are trusting a centralized actor to custody your funds. So my recommendation is maybe people just want to test this out. I don't know, go throw $100 on there and just toy around with this stuff. But understand that this stuff is coming natively to Bitcoin, where you will be able to interact with it without trusting any sort of centralized intermediary. So it's still quite early. I don't want to set wrongful expectations, but the writing on the wall is clear about what's coming.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really, really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Okay, so you can basically test the technology out of it on Ethereum, and it's it's in the works that it comes the same thing directly onto Bitcoin.
Yes, exactly.
I love that you brought up stablecoins, because I think that's an interesting thing. I think we had it once before. Someone mentioned stablecoins on top of Bitcoin, so it's a fairly new topic also to the podcast. I think stablecoins in itself, but especially stablecoins on top of Bitcoin, is kind of a Trojan horse for Bitcoin. It's like the slide around, like it's a small way of saying like, hey, you can use those Bitcoin network. And by the way, that Bitcoin network actually has a token, and that token is way better than any stablecoin. But like using that stablecoin as kind of a Trojan horse for hyper Bitcoinization, it's an interesting concept that you brought up.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about this, for several years. It's a very, very, very powerful concept and can create like an amazing flywheel. Yeah, how do I want to say this? We're kind of bringing Tether right now to Bitcoin. Like that's a big narrative that Tether is now going to come on Lightning Network. And I'm just kind of like, all right, hooray, cool. Like, but that's not what I'm in this revolution for. I'm not here to perpetuate Tether to $1 trillion and allow the U.S. government to continue borrowing and bringing everyone into the debt trap and causing mass, surveillance and, eventually inflation. Like that's not the freaking revolution that I signed up for. I'm here for freaking Bitcoin. And so, yeah, like this concept of Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, I think it's very credible, and I think it will and it should take over. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners who are like supporting and cheering things like Tether on Lightning, while I love Tether, I think they've been fantastic for Bitcoin. I think that they are Bitcoiners, and while I love Lightning, like I think that they're an amazing company. I'm just like, oh, guys, like there's a bigger revolution that's more aligned with our ethos going on here. So, anyways, I could get really fired up about this topic.
Yeah, but like what happens actually with Tether on Lightning, I saw it a little bit, but it was for me not as interesting because it's like they're using Lightning, not Bitcoin. So it's like they're using Lightning. Is it like a layer 3 on top of Bitcoin, or how does this work?
What do you mean, the Bitcoin-backed stablecoins?
Oh no, yeah, like what they are doing with Tether on Lightning.
Well, okay. So I think first and foremost, they would issue the Tether on Bitcoin layer 1 using a kind of standard called Taproot assets. And so those tokens it can actually be sent using Bitcoin layer 1. But you can lift, is the terminology that you can lift those Tether into the Lightning Network and then send them via the channels on Lightning. But they'll be minted into existence first and foremost on the Bitcoin layer 1.
Interesting. So I don't know why people get excited about it. Maybe I'm not getting it, but you're also saying like you're not excited about it.
Well, I think you like a lot of these people that are trying to bring Bitcoin into emerging markets. I think someone like Alex Gladstein is a great example of this. He's chief strategy officer of the Human Rights Foundation, or somebody like Lynn Alden, who people really respect. Like they've gone out and been boots on the ground and seen that, as much as we want to perpetuate this Bitcoin revolution, that people really tremendously value stablecoins, like to the point where it doesn't matter how much we kind of preach about like, Bitcoin is freedom technology and it's store of value. Like these people, they don't have any value to store. Like they're unwilling and unable to take on the volatility of Bitcoin. And so they just, stablecoins are 100% necessity. And so this is the way of the Bitcoin's community saying, okay, if we can't get them on board with Bitcoin, the asset yet, let's at least give them stablecoins, but have those stablecoins live on Bitcoin rails. And indirectly, that could benefit Bitcoin. So there's this kind of dissonance, this tension between what the market wants versus like what we are trying to tell them they want.
Yeah, and it's a normal transition phase, like between such a huge revolution, what Bitcoin is. Like Bitcoin is the biggest financial revolution since a long time, arguably maybe even like the biggest one we ever seen. So
absolutely,
with that, you naturally have a transition phase in there. You naturally have bridging things in there that just come from the free market, because we cannot just switch like, oh, like we use now fiat, and tomorrow we all will use Bitcoin. Like that doesn't work, and I think it's also not good. Like I think we can touch on that actually now, because of you said it in the beginning, of like we get caught up in the number co-op technology, and I honestly think it could even be bad if we rip too fast. Because if Bitcoin price rips too fast, this also means that the fiat system might collapse too fast, because like those are very related to each other. And then it's like, do we really want that? Like if you have a Titanic and you have that boat, if that sinks and you know it will sink, you want to keep it very low. You want to organically, it should slowly sink, that people actually have the time to get out, because we need time. Like we need time to build all those systems, build all those financial services on top of it, build all those great things that we can do then on Bitcoin, and the payment systems out there. But I think we're not ready yet for 8 billion people on top of Bitcoin. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think there's two considerations here in regards to number go up. I recognize, like, I'm in this for number go up, like I own Bitcoin. I want to become as wealthy as I can. And I understand that is probably like the number one motivating factor for bringing people in. Number go up, and, like freedom technology go up. But there's two considerations here. I think the first one that you touched on is yes, if Bitcoin number goes up way too fast and it kind of like perpetuates this global sovereign debt crisis, and the entire world goes spinning into like chaos, I don't care how much Bitcoin you have. Like we all lose there. Absolutely. It sets the world on fire. So I think a more gradual transition where, as the Titanic sinks, you kind of slowly bring the rescue boats, and you kind of like, all right, peacefully kind of make that transition. That would probably be in the best interest of like everybody in the world, even for Bitcoiners. I think the second byproduct that I worry about from focusing too much on number go up is what I'm calling, people selling their soul for number go up. And I think this is something that scares me. At this size of Bitcoin, trillions of dollars, what makes number go up are people like Michael Saylor and institutions and nation states. And naturally, those entities, they have their own incentives and their own motives. And are their motives kind of aligned with the ethos that Bitcoin was built on? Like, do they really care about, keeping Bitcoin hyper decentralized? Maybe, because that'll keep number going up. But do they really care about like making it scalable and non-custodial? Probably not, because they want to be the custodians. Like they want to capture the fees for providing services for Bitcoin. Like, does a nation state really care about privacy? No, like they probably want a surveillance state. And so I worry that if we get too obsessed with number go up, which again, I am very pro number go up, but if we do it at the expense of undermining the ethos that Bitcoin was built on and meant for, I think that's like a very precarious and slippery path. And I think people need to re-examine their priors about like, why are they in this revolution? Are they in this just for number go up, or are you in this for the separation of money and state? Are you in this for, freedom technology? And my intuition is that a lot of people who thought that they were in this for the revolution are really kind of thinking, like maybe I'm really not in this for the revolution, and I'm actually just in this for number go up. And that's going to be a tension point in Bitcoin moving forward.
I see it where we are so obsessed with tracking what are the inflows in ETFs. We're so obsessed with like what are nation states and strategic Bitcoin reserve are now doing. And I get the importance of that, and I get how important this is to onboard the traditional financial space into Bitcoin. It's one of those bridges that we have to build, and it's important for the adoption. But honestly, I much rather prefer having grassroots adoption in Nigeria, for example, or like El Salvador, in some state where they actually need it, and having time for the plebs to actually buy more and more of them before Bitcoin actually rips through the millions and tens of millions of dollars. and the state can take time. People probably will be disappointed if the USA doesn't do anything with strategic Bitcoin reserve. But I actually would be kind of happy because I know Bitcoin will be there for a long run. Maybe it's also because I'm young, like maybe because I'm 26. I have my whole life in front of me and not behind me. Maybe someone that's listening now and is like 65, you're like, oh, I want Bitcoin to pump now in the next 5 years. And there are different incentives. I get that and I respect that. But from my personal perspective now, like, if we have the next 2 years, Bitcoin under 150K, I would be very happy with that. I don't see it. I think we will consistently be above it, especially this year. Maybe next year also, maybe we get some crash. I don't know. Like it's hard to predict, but, lower prices is kind of a good thing if you understand if you understand Bitcoin. I actually made a poll on my YouTube community asking, what would you prefer for this year? Bitcoin price staying under 120K or Bitcoin price ripping to 1 million? And actually 40% saying, oh, I want to stay at under 120K. This means like 40% actually understood the value proposition of Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, just to be clear, like we can have both. We can have like Bitcoin at 1 million and not betray the ideals that make Bitcoin so great. You know, like we're not going to be forced to choose one or the other. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about there still.
Absolutely. Just quickly touching on that, how do you see adoption moving forward? I like the idea of gradually then suddenly, even though as I said, I feel it could be a major risk. But I do like that idea of it hitting an S-curve adoption, and then it's just like game over at that point. But how do you look at that? Is it diminishing returns? Is it S-curve adoption? What are you seeing with Bitcoin adoption moving forward?
I mean, all systems seem like a go. It would be odd to me if we didn't start seeing significant adoption. Like whether I like it or not, I do think nation states are acquiring. I do think ETF inflows are happening. I do think the importance of, you know, scarce assets like gold and then eventually Bitcoin are really starting to, you know, hit into effect. So I am expecting significant adoption over the next, you know, 2, 5, 10 years and maybe forever. Like there's nothing more powerful than, you know, a product whose time has come. And it feels like Bitcoin is right on that precipice. I'll also add that I think some of the stuff that we're working on with these ZK Rollups, like I do think that's going to massively contribute to adoption in some of these more kind of smaller emerging markets. Like a lot of the stuff I just laid out is more applicable for nation states and institutions and ETFs and like big money. But those like people in emerging markets like Nigeria or El Salvador or Bhutan or, you know, name your kind of emerging Bitcoin market, like they don't have access to those sorts of financial tools. And so, you know, if we want this kind of gradually then suddenly adoption beyond just like, you know, big swinging dick whales like owning all the Bitcoin, yeah, we need to build out some of these tools that I kind of mentioned, like these more expressive layer twos, whether it's ZK Rollups or Lightning or Fediments, like all of those are great solutions. They have different trade-offs, but like that's the grassroots movements that I think really gives us the S-curve adoption that we want.
Absolutely, yeah, that's really interesting. You said in the beginning you have a libertarian background. What do you mean by that, and what was your background in that?
Well, I always joke. Sometimes people will post on Twitter. They say, "Hey, you know, tag the person that got you into Bitcoin," and I always tag Peter Schiff because Peter did kind of like influence me early on in my life and eventually into Bitcoin. Like when I was in college, which was back around like 2011 and 2012, you know, I was reading some of these libertarian Bibles like Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. And I didn't understand that there was this whole big libertarian movement. I was just reading those books and I thought, wow, like this is just like fascinating. Like this resonates deeply with me. And I you know, would go online and find, you know, some of these niche groups, and Peter Schiff like as much as we make fun of him, like really was quite active in some of those movements early on. And he used to go down to to Wall Street during like the Wall Street protests, and ask people about capitalism, and preach the gospel of gold and scarce assets. And yeah, I mean, I used to enjoy those videos, and he was very influential in some of my thinking. And so then many years later, when I see him debating people like Voorhees or Pomp, or like name your favorite Bitcoiner, I would be like, oh, like my old buddy Peter Schiff, what's he up to? And I would listen to him in these debates, and I'd be like, wow, these Bitcoin people are making a lot more sense. And then you fall down the rabbit hole like everybody says, and you see how Bitcoin touches on everything in your life. But that's kind of a long-winded way of me saying how I went from these early kind of libertarian ideas, eventually to discovering Bitcoin.
It's Peter Schiff was actually also my first Bitcoin video. I think it was between Eric and him. It was a debate on Bitcoin versus gold, as it's always is with him, and it was such a great video. It was like with a great format. I forgot the channel name, but it's a really great format. If you type in Eric Voorhees and Peter Schiff debating gold versus Bitcoin, it's probably the first video that pops up. And it's also then had like question of the audience, which I actually some of the question I actually had while listening to it, and the audience actually asked it. And this was literally the first actual Bitcoin video that I kind of looked at, and it really orange pilled me from the get go. I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because I didn't get why we need Bitcoin in the first place. So I also never understood gold. And then I looked into Bitcoin and I found that video, and it was perfect because they explained both the problem really good, and in the solution, Peter just didn't make any sense, but he made a lot of sense describing the problem. And I truly believe that Peter Schiff doesn't get enough credit for orange pilling people. Like, totally. I talked to so many people that kind of or slightly got orange pilled by Peter Schiff. Like, he's orange pilling more people than the average pleb out there. Like, like he's doing a lot of orange pilling work. And I hope he has some Bitcoin. Honestly, I do hope that he has some, but maybe he actually doesn't, and maybe he actually is as resistant to Bitcoin as he actually appears to be. But he is a great orange pill, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, Peter Schiff, he kind of reminds me of my dad, where it's like very stubborn and very opinionated and very kind of like boomer. But amongst all of that, there's some very sage advice in what he's saying. I do think I know his son Spencer at one point like had Bitcoin. Now he's kind of like big into the whole AI is going to save the world, and I don't know how much he's into Bitcoin anymore. But I thought that there was a path there where I almost like, I make the comparison to Star Wars, that like, Anakin Skywalker like eventually became Darth Vader, and he was the chosen one. Like, he was supposed to bring like balance to the Force, and Darth Vader or Anakin like ended up not doing that. In this case, it's Peter Schiff. But he's like being redeemed by his son, and that's this kind of like character arc of the next generation, like picking up the torch and redeeming like the kind of revolution that his dad started. So that was my hope for the Schiff family dynamic.
Yeah, and he could really have had a build on top of that. I think like any podcast would have brought him on like, why my dad is wrong about Bitcoin. I think it would have been great having him as a Bitcoin. I don't even know if he was ever on a podcast or on a Bitcoin podcast, but his Bitcoin scene was kind of short-lived. I have a question that I asked each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Oh man, so much of my life has been consumed by Bitcoin. Well, my new obsession is pickleball. If anybody's trying to find hobbies outside of Bitcoin, I think that's an interesting one. I also, I've gone down a lot of the longevity rabbit hole. I think that's been another kind of passion of mine. Is seeing like what's happening there, and if you want to talk about like low time preferences. Well, that's a big topic in Bitcoin. Imagine if, you could live beyond 100 years. You could live 200, 300, 500, like 1,000 years. Like what if humans can essentially be immortal in the same way that like Bitcoin kind of broke our brains and, caused us to think in lower time preferences. Like what if your actual biological life can also provide that to you? That sends you down like a whole different meta of really understanding the long-term implications of Bitcoin, because you will actually be around here to see it. And there's early signs that, maybe technology and some of this biology stuff that people are researching, like maybe there's some legitimacy to this. Like maybe, we're not bound by our human bodies and aging, and we can kind of like transcend beyond that. So yeah, that's another topic that interests me.
That's super interesting. I think one of the guys that currently is popularizing that is, how's he called? Brian Johnson, the guy who also had the Netflix docu. And it's an interesting thought, because we do get older, and you wonder if like maybe biology and medicine is at some point so good that we can add every year 2 more years to your life, where you basically are immortal at that point, outside of like you get hit by a bus and stuff like that. But it would make me feel really, I don't know, I do like that there's death, because it makes you value your time. It's a weird thing saying I do like that there's death, but imagine how afraid you would be if the only way you would die is through accidents and get hit by a bus and weird things like that. I think people would be way more scared in general, and would be way more like, okay, like I can relax now, and just lay back and do nothing. And maybe I do it tomorrow a little bit. Like let's take it real slow, because if I die, it's over. And now, because now there's like, okay, you only have one life. Like you have like this finite amount of time for everyone. At some point, it's over. But if at some point it's not for everyone over, like that has interesting implications on society. That that's a fascinating topic. It's not something that I'm deeply researching, but it's something that I'm sometimes funny discussing with some friends. And it is interesting to think about, like, what if people don't die? what happens then?
Yeah, I mean, it arguably is like the quintessential, like sacred cow, so to speak, in our society. It's just something that people always assume, like you can never cheat death. And so many of our kind of societal and cultural myths, so to speak, even things like religion, are kind of dependent on this idea that you will have an end of life. And I agree with you. It could lead to some crazy, wacky incentives in human behavior and things that we've never actually seen before. But maybe, who knows? Maybe the AI overlords come in and they build out something, and you can, copy your brain and your thoughts to a hard drive. And if your meat sack ever, gets bonked in the head and you die, it's like, well, all right, we'll just, restore from hard drive, restore from cloud, and, you get a new meat sack. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of ways that it can go.
That's another thing that I didn't even consider. Like, you can probably back up your existence.
Exactly.
You're like, oh, I should not forget to back up today. Like, oh shit, I did not back up for a whole week. If I die now, I fall back to last Sunday. Like, what a weird thought. Like that's crazy. If we look back at some point, like, could you imagine in 2025 you could still die?
Yes, exactly. I think there's actually like, I think there's I just saw the trailer for it, but I think like a Robert Pattinson movie that's coming out, like a similar concept of this, and yeah, like his life just constantly like reboots. And I think at one point he meets a clone of himself or something. Maybe I'm getting the plot wrong here, but there is something like that futuristic thing where it's like, whoa, like you duplicated my brain into another body here.
I mean, I I cloned my voice already because I have so many recordings. I can easily clone my voice, and honestly, with just the voice, you don't know if it's AI or me. It's literally that good already. With the video,
do I need to be worried right now on this call? Is this the real Robin?
Like actually, I think we're not that far away of that being not like right now. It's a real Robin. Would the AI character also say? But the video, I think, is not quite there yet. But the audio is already so good. It probably needs a lot of processing power and a lot of like. You touch something on me and I immediately react to that. So like AI, I think is like sometimes still a little bit too slow, especially if you have to imitate the voice and stuff like that. But that's a problem we can solve easily. And then it comes to like, okay, but if you also just upload everything onto that AI, not just the voice image, but also your memories, what you know, what is your thing. And someone like me with like, having like almost 500 hours of long format video on there, that would be extremely powerful just to plug into an AI, and it probably can imitate me really good. And at some point, like I can just put my character on there and I go skiing and my guests speak with an AI character and most maybe don't even recognize that, and maybe you also put your AI character on there and do AI character talk to each other and people listen to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like too morbid here, but you know, kind of what you're saying is like you have so much data to train these AIs on, which is amazing. And like I think about this in the context of my parents. You know, my parents are getting older, like they're, I think, you know, approaching their 70s, and like it does cross my mind. I'm like, do I want to start getting content of them? Like, do I want to start accumulating photos and videos and recordings and like, would it be a shame that if God forbid, like something ever happened to them, that like I just only have memories of them? But, you know, like if I actually had enough content of us just, you know, having these memories of us just like sitting together as a family and having coffee and, you know, just like chit chatting and like these like fond memories that I have, like if I just had cameras and videos like everywhere in our house, you know, like surveillance state on my parents, like would I be thankful that I can essentially recreate them in this future AI? And like that is honestly a really cool thought that I've had, but I haven't had, I don't know what the right word is, like the willpower to be like, hey, well, like we're gonna plant cameras everywhere in your house so that if something happens to you, I can like remember you. Like that's just like a very awkward conversation to have with my parents, but that thought has crossed my mind. Like, you know, if this AI and longevity stuff doesn't hit for the next like 10 years, like are they gonna miss out on that wave? It's just it's very interesting thoughts.
Also, then you can maybe like even you can clone them, put them on like an AI thing, put like some sack around them, and they actually like almost like live. And that's an interest. That's why it came to my mind of like it being immortal. Maybe with having so much content online, you're already immortal. It's like how amazing would it be if like AI imitates like a Steve Jobs or someone that is in the recent history where we already have some interviews and stuff like that, and we know how he fought and we have records of that, and we can just like imitate him and like ask Steve Jobs questions like, oh, what would he say to that? Obviously, AI would speculate to a certain part, but it opens a whole floodgate, and now everything is recorded. People upload massive amounts of data online. I mean, I'm a prime example. I'm literally having 365 podcasts in a year that are usually over 1 hour long. That's a lot of video content. If I accumulate over, let's say, the next 50 years, like that's a lot of content to train an AI on. He probably can imitate me better than myself because he knows more about me than I can remember in my brain.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Really, really powerful. And we're already seeing early indications that this stuff is possible. I mean, the Steve Jobs example, I mean, you could just go tell ChatGPT right now to imitate Steve Jobs, and like it could probably pass a Turing test.
Absolutely. Really cool. We have an endotin in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, how can you see Bitcoin used for the creation of art in the future?
How can Bitcoin be used for the what?
For the creation of art. I think what he wanted to say with that question was more of like, what impact will Bitcoin have on art and culture and all those creative outlets, with like what difference does sound money versus fiat money make on art and all those things?
Yeah. Well, I think that art and culture, like a natural, like a necessary prerequisite for that is the ability to have freedom, like not just like economic and monetary freedom, but just, you know, property rights in general. And that's what I see before Bitcoin, even as money. Like Bitcoin is a tool for human property rights. Like normally, in order to have a free society, you first and foremost need freedom of yourself. You need agency of your own self and ownership of your own thoughts. But after that, you need the ability to have property rights, to take the fruits of your labor, some sort of time that you put into society, and then be able to store that as value in something that nobody can steal from you, nobody can debase from you. That ability to have property rights is the single most important facet of in building block of a free society. And normally we have to have some sort of government, some sort of fiat system that says we have a big gun, you know, we're going to give you freedom because we will use our big gun to protect those rights from you. But with Bitcoin, like, we allow people all around the world, even if they don't have these functioning governments, to have this sense of property rights. And then ultimately that leads to the ability to have freedom and a more freely functioning society anywhere in the world. And I think once people have that, once they have freedom of themselves and freedom to own property, and then eventually freedom to save money, that opens up the ability to have creative pursuits. And, you know, we talk about Bitcoin is how, like, Jeff Booth talks about how the scarcity of Bitcoin ultimately leads to the abundance of society. Like, that's such a you know, mental brain buster. But like, once you understand that we can have abundance in society, that allows people to avoid doing like productivity and going and digging holes and building buildings and all this stuff, to instead say, like, I'm going to pursue my highest form of self. Like, I'm going to go through this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this self-actualization. And at the very top of that, it's like my own personal pursuits of creativity. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but where I'm going with this is that Bitcoin ushers in an age of abundance. And once you have abundance, you are free to pursue arts and culture and romance and love and like all these kind of like greater pursuits in life.
I think that's a great answer. I think it shows like what Bitcoin actually enables on a big scale. I do like that. Really cool. Before I let you go, where can people find you? Where can people ask you questions, reach out to you, and DM you?
You can find me on Twitter at David_Seroy, S as in Sam, EROY. Just, you know, don't pass any judgment for anything I say on Twitter.
Yeah, usually we shouldn't do that. Thank you so much, David, for being on the show. Was a pleasure having you. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening and for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye.